Long exposure shots of moving water can be some of the most epic photos you will ever take. But they're also really easy to mess up if you don't follow some critical steps. So today I'm going to explain how to avoid 3 beginner mistakes when you're taking long exposure photographs of moving water. Hey everyone, hope you've all been taking some epic photos this summer. I know I've really been enjoying the summer. I actually just got back from a trip to Canada, and I can't wait to share some footage from taking photographs of puffins. So stay tuned for that in a future video. But today what I want to talk about is one of my favorite photography subjects, and that's long exposures. More specifically, long exposures with water. So let's get right to it and jump into mistake number 1. Mistake number 1 is too much camera movement. With long exposures, any movement will add significant blur to your final image. This can come from hand movement if you're trying to shoot handheld. It can come from wind. It could be from standing on a dock or an unstable surface. So to prevent this type of motion blur, using a tripod is essential. And it's not just using a tripod. You also need to make sure that it's balanced and steady. So there's 2 tips for this. First, keep the tripod as low to the ground as you can while still getting your composition that you're looking for. What you want to avoid is having the tripod neck too high, for example, and that might wobble back and forth a little bit as you're taking your shot. Tip number 2 is to use a remote shutter release or a delayed shot timer. I use a 2-second delayed timer on my shots. Sometimes if the conditions are really windy or I'm really worried about it, I might use the 10-second timer. With a remote shutter release, it's usually a cable that connects to your camera, or it might be an app on your phone or even a Bluetooth device. For me, that's just another piece of equipment that I don't have, and I feel like the 2-second delayed timer usually works just fine for me. All right, before I move on to mistake number 2, if you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. It really helps to grow the channel. Also, if you're curious about what gear I use, I've listed that below in the description, so you can always check that out as well. Okay, now mistake number 2 is shooting in harsh lighting conditions. Ideally, you want even light. So for example, with ocean shots, you want to shoot before the sunrise or after the sunset. That ensures that the sun isn't in the sky and overexposing your shot. For waterfalls, you want to look for an overcast day, or maybe if it's in the woods and there's plenty of shade, that'll work as well. What you don't want is direct sun coming into your shot. That'll really just overexpose things and make it hard to get the light right. When it comes to settings, you want to stop down with your aperture. This just means you're going to increase the f-stop number. That helps let in less light, which balances out the longer shutter speed that lets in more light. And we'll get more into shutter speed in just a minute. One of the other options you have is to use a filter to help compensate for the light. There's neutral density filters and polarizing filters, which help either reduce the light coming in or reduce the way the light reflects off of the water, which will help with those shots. Now, I don't use filters that often, so I'm curious what you use. Do you use filters when you take long exposure shots, when you're shooting water? If so, leave a comment down below. Let me know what type of filter you prefer and what's worked best for you. All right, now to mistake number 3, and this could be the most important, and that's using the wrong shutter speed. Now, there's no perfect shutter speed since it really depends on the light and the speed of the water. The conditions will ultimately dictate what shutter speed works best in that scenario. Now, the darker the lighting is, the longer your shutter speed tends to be. And with the water speed, if it's moving really quickly, you won't need quite as slow of a shutter speed since there's going to be some built-in blur. If the water's moving slowly, on the other hand, like water gently washing ashore or a slow-moving stream, you're going to have a slower shutter speed to create that blur. Ultimately, it takes some trial and error to see what works. Too slow and the water blurs too much, too fast, and you don't get the silky streaks you're looking for. So really experiment. Sometimes half a second is perfect. Sometimes 10 seconds or more is better, especially if there's low light. I've shot some great long exposure shots that are 20 or 30 seconds, and those types of long exposure shots really work best at sunrise or sunset. Now, if you want to learn more about the best ways to take shots at sunrise or sunset, check out my video right here where I walk through the 4 steps to improve your sunrise and sunset photos. Hope you enjoyed this and found something useful. That's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.